Welcome back, adventurers! Today we are continuing our video series covering everything you need to know for my Pathfinder 2nd Edition Homebrew Setting, the Follies of Novus Aurum. In this video we will continue to explore the 8 families that control the city, but before I begin I wanted to reiterate a few things. While these organizations are called families, almost none of them are actually based on any sort of bloodline or lineage. They are mostly referred to as families because the first one to be formally founded, the Nacelli, did spring up from a family. The others are mostly groups of individuals united by a common goal, an ideology, or just the kind of business that they are in. Outside of the higher-ups in the Nacelli, being born to members of a certain family does not guarantee you membership. Many children do go on to work for the same family as their parents, but it is not guaranteed or automatic. These are not sworn houses of the old days. They are more like corporations or unions. Also, I wanted to mention the concept of favored subclasses. These are the custom subclasses I am making, and each family has one tied to them. These subclasses are either found in great numbers in a specific family, or that they pursue due to their skill sets. Not every fortune-kissed sorcerer is part of the Nacelli, but a lot of them do end up working for them, and they have a fondness for the subclass. These subclasses are also a work in progress, so I will only be outlining the concept behind the subclass for the moment, with the proper rule set coming later. And lastly, and this is important, players do not have to align themselves with one of the families. The families are there as options, not inevitabilities. Also, it is not unusual for citizens to have one foot into one family business and the other in a different one. Many institutions in the city are often sponsored by a combination of families, where their interests overlap. Cassodina artisans work with Babylos builders to create statues and interior design. The libraries, schools, and the university are collaborations between Icaryth, Cyrenel, and Sasharan educators, to say nothing of the myriad trade schools of the Babylos. Finding oneself with one foot in 2 or more worlds is not unheard of, and not even necessarily frowned upon, most of the time. You can work for a family without pledging your absolute loyalty to them. They are well aware many are just looking for a job and income. That being said, for those who are willing to show long-term exclusive commitment to a particular family, there are rewards aplenty. Loyalty is made of diamond, not gold, or so the saying goes. But let's start discussing the 2 specific families this video will feature, the Icaryth and the Cassodina. The Icaryth family are a fascinating example in how intelligence and wisdom are not the same. Theirs is a story of great accomplishments and the cost of hubris. Without the Icaryth, Novus Aurum would absolutely not be the glittering metropolis it is today. Their innovations and tireless quest for discovery have shaped the island like no other. And yet, they are not truly considered a major player in the city's politics, and more often than not are overlooked completely unless their particular talents are needed. And honestly, this suits them fine, mostly. But why is a family so intertwined with the city's successes and advancement considered essentially a second-tier faction? Well, to understand that, we need to examine their history. The first scholars and researchers who arrived on the island did not arrive united under a single banner. Several prestigious schools had sent their own competing teams, not to mention the hobby scholars, the hedge mages, and the particularly ambitious solo students. And as you would expect, such big personalities and egos clashed often. At best, this led to heated arguments in the common mess tents. At worst, outright sabotage and even the occasional magical duel in what was left of the streets. This severely slowed progress on unlocking the secrets of the elemental shards, especially considering in these early days facilities were crude and manpower unskilled and limited. And let's be clear, The shards and their potential uses were basically the only thing the ruined island had going for it in the early days. If the researchers did not produce anything of value from their work, their funding would dry up, and everyone else who had made the journey was basically there as support for the researchers. They needed the results to keep the funds coming as much as the researchers did. Eventually, the squabbles and petty rivalries were becoming such a problem that the other nascent families were forced to intervene. And so, the Icaryth Concord was formed. With help from the other families, the Icaryth were organized with a central bureaucratic leadership that received proposals and allocated resources and manpower as they deemed appropriate. There was an immediate pushback, especially from the first set of researchers nominated to the council. They were opposed to even a limited term seemingly behind a desk and away from their workshops. Then a rule was added that those who were elected to the regulating council could be able to waive the approval process for their own pet projects for as long as they held their post. This incentive worked wonders, and the council seats are coveted to this day. A system was also put in place that more everyday technical work was given to more junior members, who would then, over time, earn a spot in more cutting-edge, innovative work. The rookies kept the lights running, while the veterans researched better lanterns, so to speak. With their organizational problems handled, and the collective brilliance of its researchers now harnessed and focused, the Icaryth began their period of true innovation. This led to the discovery of how to reliably trigger the imbued elemental energies in the shards, and to identify which element any given shard was aligned with. An explosion of practical applications followed, with the researchers now creating tools, talismans, and other items powered by the shards. This success was the leading factor in the Second Rush, as they now had more tools than they had laborers to use them, so a call went out for more manpower. And it is important to note that most of these elemental tools were not being used by the Icaryth themselves. In what would become a trend, the Icaryth quickly became uninterested in a creation once it had been created, unless it was to add some new feature or refine it. Using shard-powered gloves to help clear rubble or build a house held absolutely no interest to the researchers, not compared to the next idea that popped into their heads. And they continue to find new and exciting uses for the shards or to make their existing devices more efficient, and are still innovating into the current era. It was these innovations and inventions that allowed Novus Aurum to go from an island of ruins to a glittering metropolis in a mere 200 years. Now, you may be wondering why, with so much of the city's success tied to the Icaryth's innovations, they have not capitalized on it and become the ruling faction of the city. A number of factors have kneecapped the idea of Icaryth dominance in Novus Aurum. First off, none of the Icaryth have ever been good at business. Once an invention is created, they lose a lot of interest in it and don't make much of an effort to seek maximum potential profits, impacting the potential wealth they could make from their work. And then there was the dust fever outbreaks, because, from the very beginning, anything to do with the shards is immediately associated with the Icaryth, and not without reason. While the first dust fever outbreak did earn the early Icaryth researchers some ire, most accepted the explanation that the shards were a relatively unknown resource, and they had not known what they were dealing with. The second outbreak was much harder to brush off, and permanently stained their reputation. When the first truly big infrastructure works were being undertaken, and the population was booming, the need for greater, more easily accessible clean water became pressing. The Icaryth undertook the project, but some in their ranks were not satisfied using established methods for this task. A small cadre of technicians installed an experimental water purification system, using elemental shards as part of the filter, without consulting anyone outside the family. The system had not undergone rigorous testing yet, and not long after, a great many people got sick from drinking the water. The situation was made worse by the Icaryth not coming forward with their involvement until well after a large number of citizens were hospitalized. The fact the fever this time was in the water made the illness spread much farther and quicker than previously. It got so bad that the newly formed city guard, the Angenreth, had to be called in to lock down one of the larger clinics where a number of victims had become delirious and attacked the medical staff en masse. This proved an opportunity for a handful of the other families who put aside their squabbles temporarily to force through a number of restrictions and regulations onto the Icaryth. After that, the Icaryth Concord was a muzzled beast, still able to pursue their discoveries, but not trusted to be left to their own devices, and required to make regular reports about their projects at meetings with the other families. In the current day, the Icaryth are viewed with a mix of admiration and mistrust. No one can deny the key role that they have played in forging the glittering city, but few feel they are ever truly trustworthy enough to operate without supervision. A common saying goes, an Icaryth can make a mean cup of coffee, but always get them to taste it first. The Icaryth Bastion is the Cold Forge, a vast, uninspiring cube-like structure containing their archives, council chambers, and most well-equipped laboratories. It was built over a sinkhole where the single largest elemental shard had been discovered, and rather than spend the time to break it down and cart it away, the Icaryth simply began building around it. It is also possibly one of the more secure buildings in the city, with layers of obtuse and overly complicated security measures that only the Icaryth can make sense of. As previously mentioned, the Icaryth are administered by a board of directors, known in the current era as the Discovery Council. There are only ever 10 members, and they do have a limited 5-year term. And while individuals can be elected more than once, they cannot hold a seat for 2 consecutive terms. Some notable Icaryth include Halbert Rothstein, a somewhat contentious figure among the Icaryth. Respected for their brilliance and mathematical genius, the human Duskborn is also infamous for having the worst turnover rate with research assistants. Even the most ambitious student will have second thoughts about the 8th lab explosion in a week. Not to mention, it is rumored that Halbert is working on a decades-spanning secret project, the nature of which he refuses to discuss with anyone or let any of his assistants help with. Then there's Brigitta the Tinkerer, a bit of an outlier in the family, but still well respected in many circles. The gnome specializes in clockwork mechanisms that are not powered by elemental shards, and operate more like clocks with a signature wind-up key required to animate them. She also keeps shop in one of the less glitzy parts of town, and has been known to make house calls for people in need of appliance and gadget repair, though nothing shard-related. And lastly, there's Marilyn Cloudstrider, an elven researcher who created the first practical application of air-aligned shards, and whose much hyped airship public transit system has been stymied by problems with research into super light metals. It doesn't stop her from being one of the most visible, high-ranking researchers, a frequent center of conversation of high society parties. For a somewhat socially awkward scholar, she cleans up nicely when she wants to. And lastly, the favored subclass for the Icaryth is the Elementalist and an Innovation Inventor. This is just an inventor who specializes in specifically devices and tools, you could say, that are powered by the elemental shards. So they do have a fair amount of versatility because they can, like, if they have like a gun or something, they can swap out different shard canisters into it to achieve different results. To the city at large, the Cassodina family, the Artful Hand, are a source of much joy in the city. The organization in the city behind almost all poets, painters, sculptors, musicians, actors, and even professionally trained chefs. They are singularly responsible for fostering and sponsoring almost all art and entertainment in the city. But in reality, This is just one side of the coin. Behind the curtain, in the shadows, they are also a highly trained network of spies, thieves, and occasionally assassins. In the simplest terms, the Cassodina are the closest in this setting to an actual crime family, with an important caveat. They have worked tremendously hard to ensure almost no one even knows they are a crime family. The Cassodina founders were the survivors of a big city thieves guild run out of town after a purge brought their organization down in flames around them. And I want to emphasize how this failure has colored the mentality of the Cassodina ever since. They came to believe the reason they were sent running with their tails between their legs was because they got too big, too loud. They swaggered around, wearing their infamy and influence like a coat, believing discretion and secrecy were things you didn't need to concern yourself with when you had power. This bit them in the ass hard, and the few survivors took this lesson to heart. They vowed never to leave themselves vulnerable again, and they saw secrecy as their greatest shield. While they were in the midst of fleeing for their lives, they heard about what was just starting up in the ruins of the old city, and it sounded like the perfect fresh start. Everyone likes to get in on the ground floor of something after all, and the Cassodina have always had a good nose for potential. By the time the first new stone buildings were raised in the city, they had eyes and ears everywhere. They played both sides during the Babylos-Nacelli standoff. They had ears listening in during the Icaryth's earliest breakthroughs. Every significant moment in the city's history, there was a Cassodina either listening at the door or even whispering in someone's ear. The Cassodina knew knowledge was power, and they wanted to know everything. Everything. In the present day, the Cassodina hold court in locked rooms in the back of theaters and nightclubs. They recruit every musician and an actor they can find, and those with real talent, charisma, and creativity, they introduce to the backstage work. While they mostly deal in information and some strategic theft, and as a rule try to avoid outright violence, they make exceptions for interlopers, and especially those who break contracts or betray them. Their cadre of trained assassins is not large, but they are extremely well trained, and the ones who work only for the family even more so. And to note, they do own a great many legitimate businesses as well, including a great many of the legal gambling houses in the city, though they stay out of the Golden Scales, the largest casino in the city. If you were trying to stay out of the spotlight, you don't pick fights with a dragon who owns a casino, after all. Some who are in the know about the Cassodina's true nature will whisper, when they are absolutely certain no one is listening, that the Cassodina are also engaged in a century-long conspiracy. The fact that in nearly 200 years no one family has triumphed over their rivals and achieved dominance has left some suspicious that someone behind the scenes is ensuring that the balance of power is kept stable. And few are in a better position and motivated to keep this conflict going than the Cassodina. Conflict is good for business, after all, if you are taking money from both sides. It is important to note, as a family policy, they are not interested in ruling the city. They just want to play the game and make their money. Even if most of the original Cassodina are long dead, the lessons they learned in the past have been etched into their organizational memory. If I may usher you all behind the curtain for a moment, there is a bit of deliberate cognitive dissonance required for players when it comes to the Cassodina. If a player wants their character to be aware of the Cassodina's true nature, that is absolutely fine. After 200 years in a city this size, no secret is held that tightly. Everyone has a story or a theory about a shadowy organization. That being said, they do have to be aware that it is not common knowledge, and that there is an inherent danger in being casual with that knowledge. The only privacy the Cassodina respect is their own, and to some extent their clients. They also love to take advantage of the assumption that only artists or similar types work for them. Those are just the best ones that they train and cultivate themselves. Informants can be anyone, and random street thugs can be just as easily the one setting your house on fire as a trained Cassodina agent. The artful hand can and will find you. It's just a matter of when. The Cassodina Bastion is probably a hidden room in the Rose Thorn Theatre, the most opulent concert hall in Novus Aurum. It is also possible they have a series of safe houses across the city, but it's hard to know for sure. How their council, the unseen court, is run or structured is also a secret. The Cassodina do value stability and hierarchy, though, so whatever the structure, it probably does not change very often. Some notable Cassodina include Sagittar Null, a dwarf literally older than Novus Aurum, and was already considered a venerable ancient when he first journeyed to the island. To the public, he is the curator of the Archway Hall, the most prestigious art gallery in the city. It is rumored he alone remembers where the name Cassodina came from. But if there is one thing he loves more than gold, it's secrets. And despite his advanced age, his mind remains lethally sharp and an endless library of blackmail material. Then there is Ruby Eyes, a remarkable automaton and assassin capable of modifying and reconfiguring their body into different forms for different missions. Ruby Eyes only reveals their telltale scarlet eyes when they go into business mode, and by then it is often too late for their target. And lastly, there's Cassandra Mazeppi, a fawn painter who burst onto the scene with a series of dazzling and daring art pieces that sometimes veer into downright unsettling. With all the waves she makes with her unique style, she is a common guest of honor at many high society gatherings. If she passes on any of the gossip she hears to the other members of the Cassodina, well, that's her business. Also, pay no attention to the rumors that some of her paramours have gone missing just before she unveils a new painting. It's probably just a coincidence. And lastly, the favored subclass for the Cassodina is the Faker Muse Bard. And this is a bard that derives their kind of effectiveness from lying and deception. They are great at, on the spot, spinning up stories and rumors to get what they want. They are just the most adept at using their talents for charisma and inspiration to lie and deceive. And that is the second set of families. Next video, we will be talking about the dedicated Sirenel and the spiritual Sisharan. If you want to be alerted to when the next video is released, like and subscribe. And most importantly, if you have questions, please be sure to leave them in the comments. I will try and address any comments in the next video. So, thank you all for watching, and until next time, may all your hits be crits, and all your rolls be golden. Bye!